welcome to another episode, a special edition of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies. I've been having an absolutely spectacular time sharing my visit to Texas distilleries, and I've had the privilege of having some special guests on to give me sort of a behind-the-scenes look and understanding of these distilleries. Now, I know my audience is a lot larger than just what's going on in Texas, what's going on around the world in whiskeys, and a lot of the whiskeys inside of Texas don't make their way out of Texas. Some are super small production, but my hope is in watching my reviews and sharing my studies is to encourage people to get out there and perhaps on a vacation, take a trip down to Texas and visit the distilleries, because they really have some unique and absolutely spectacular stuff going on there. I'm this close, this tempted to move down to Texas. The only thing I don't care for is the weather. The weather is a little bit crazy, but it seems that what is not fun for humans, it makes some excellent whiskey down there. So in this episode, I have a special guest on from Still Austin. All right, and let me bring him on.
Hi,
Chris,
Eric.
thank you much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
First, I'll say you have a marvelous
Yes. You have a very nice haircut as well.
There you go. So, some things I like to do is get a little bit of background information about the distillery. Why did you get into the whiskey business? There's this saying that goes, in order to make a small fortune in the whiskey business or wine business, you need to start with a large fortune. If you want to get rich, going into wine or whiskey production is probably not the direction to go, because there's a lot of investment up front, and sometimes it can take quite a time to get a return on that. So what is your background, and why did you get into the whiskey business?
Sure. So my background, I don't really have a background in making whiskey. I'm an economist. That's what I did before starting a whiskey distillery. The reason that I got into this was very, very personal. My dad retired about 6 years ago, and he came to me and said, "I want to start a craft whiskey distillery. Will you help me?" And what I thought was that my dad's going through a late life crisis. He's having a very hard time. He's very bored. He's driving my mom crazy, and he wants to spend time with me. And so when he presented his idea, I mean, as an economist, I can tell you that opening a whiskey distillery is possibly the worst idea that I'd ever seen go across my desk. So I thought, this is absolutely a terrible idea. But I said, sure, I'll help you 100%. Because I thought we were going to just have a really good time, studying it. This is a good idea or not. We were going to travel. We were going to go to Scotland. We're going to go to Kentucky. We're going to go all around Texas and all around the world visiting distilleries. Dad and I are going to drink a lot of whiskey and have a really good time. And then in the end, we're going to come to our senses and decide this is a terrible idea. That's what I thought we were going to actually do. And what in fact actually happened is that in the midst of doing all of that, state laws in Texas changed, and that made it a little bit more economically feasible to open a craft whiskey distillery. So we did.
Awesome. So did your dad have any background in the spirits other than perhaps consumption?
My dad had a career in the beverage industry.
Oh,
and he was a amateur winemaker and amateur whiskey. Some might say he's a whiskey maker. He was a moonshiner. Right. And for us, like, we were really this kind of started as like a legacy project, like, just we're going to spend time together. Right. And so a lot of our inspiration was like being really intentional about doing what we wanted to do.
Right.
Very much like what's the best thing we could do, rather than, it really was, you made a good point earlier about like just the costs and everything involved. And it is really expensive to start a whiskey distillery. So we had to put together kind of a plan of how we're going to pay for this money losing endeavor. And but we really kind of, I think, struck a strong balance between doing what we really felt was the right thing to do and being able to afford what we were doing. So
Right. So that's actually sort of a common story I hear. People, they have some sort of business. Maybe they're going into retirement, and they buy some grapes and they get their equipment maybe in the garage, and they're making wine, or they get this little tiny stills about this big, and they're making a little bit, and then that hobby kind of grows and grows and grows, and next thing you know, they go into a full-time business. So it's very, very, very common, at least particularly here in California, that either generationally you grew up on it, so you're the third, fourth generation winemaker, or you kind of got the bug and you start doing it at home, and next thing you know, it turns into a full business. So it's really, really neat. So, but there's got to be a sort of a leap of faith where you go, okay, this isn't just a hobby. This is something we're going to go for, and we're going to hope and pray that we get some return on this.
what was our leap? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So we did something that I think was I don't know that this is that typical, but we decided we would go into business with our neighbors and start up a whiskey distillery with them. And actually we kind of basically passed the hat around and said, who wants to be part of
Okay.
a distillery?
So this isn't a dad and son adventure. You also got your neighbors involved as well.
Yeah, and they became our co-founders too.
Okay.
And then we have about 200 people around Austin that put some money in a hat to be able to start a whiskey distillery. But we were very intentional. Like once we decided, well, let me say this. My dad had decided from the beginning that he was going to do this. He was very intentional.
Okay.
Once I was on board, it's like, this is going to take a good amount of resources to be able to do. And I think that intentionality kind of came across not just in kind of raising the money that we felt we needed, but also like being really intentional about like what is it that we're really trying to do here,
right?
We had traveled and visited a lot of distilleries and seen a lot of different ideas. And it's amazing, like how many different, I'm sure you've seen like even quite a bit more than me as different business models and different ways of about doing things. But like for us, like a lot of our vision from the start was asking ourselves, how do we create something that is really genuine to us, to our place, the kind of people we are, the culture we have, the foods and things that you find in our region. Like how do we do that in a way that's super, super authentic? Right. Because that's the one thing about whiskey is that it like the story is the heart of it. Right. And the thing that I had loved out of my little journey with my dad is just that, you when you have a whiskey, you are taking time, you're slowing down.
Reading the book, watching the movie, or hanging out with friends and having a conversation like we are. It's that kind of chilling out moment.
It is. And you're placing a high value on that time, on the person that you're spending it with. It's like a beautiful, intentional moment.
Right.
Focus on them.
Right.
And so anyway, I guess for us, like we were super intentional, like working. We were intentional in what we started with. Like we knew we wanted to work with all Texas farmers, 100% Texas grains, be very locally focused, use like our Austin community here. Even we use local artists on our labels and that sort of thing. But we also discovered a lot like in the process. So right. The discovery of our region, of ourselves, and then just like, you kind of just like, as a whiskey matures, you discover things in it. As a whiskey distillery matures, you discover things in it.
Right, right. So I was just going to point out to the viewers in case they hadn't seen my other video. This is their bourbon whiskey, and it says first barrels release grain to glass, and it's bottled at 50.2 or 100.4 proof. So this is the bottle I'm reviewing. And so you decided, there's a bunch of different ways you can go. You can go, look, we're young, we need some income, we need to produce something. We could be sourcing from somewhere else. A lot of distilleries do it. There's nothing wrong with that. And then eventually we'll build up our own stock and we'll transition into making our own whiskey. But this is a bourbon that has this approach to terroir. Now, it's an overused word sometimes, and people in the wine world think it just belongs to them, and sometimes French winemakers think that term just belongs to them. But this is Texas through and through grain to glass bourbon whiskey, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And for me, something I've been complaining about is Japanese whiskeys that are really a blend of Japanese whiskey and Canadian whiskey and Scotch whiskey and whatever else, and then they're not transparent about what's in the bottle. You can't even find on their website what's actually in the bottle. You got to go to some other source to try to find out. But so I really like that. This really begins with an authentic bottle. So did you begin grain to glass, or did you have any other previous releases, or you begin here?
We have always been 100%
Wow.
grain to glass, and that is a difficult road.
Yeah.
Even our very first products were unaged. We called them new make,
Right. Wow.
obviously a Scottish term. And they were nothing but a basket of grain from Central Texas.
Wow.
That's it.
That is like the most, I would say, romantic, the most courageous, the most, that true to the heart of Texas, and yet economically, which we began with, is kind of like, maybe that ain't the best way to go about this, because that's probably the most challenging, and yet for the whiskey connoisseur, for the whiskey enthusiast, that's the one we go, yes, that's what we like to find in our whiskeys.
Yeah, we really like the way that we've done it. It's not an easy way to do it. And it's, I think, helped us to understand some of the things that are different for us and for our region. I mean, when I look around at distilleries, and there are a lot of very inspirational whiskey distilleries. It's amazing the sort of things that you see out there now. But I see a lot of things that are very interesting in terms of like really trying some new things with technique, and they're really pushing, they may have a wide variety of things that they've made. And then there are some that are really kind of like their focus seems to be a lot more on what's intrinsic to them. And I think it's a little bit harder to do because you're trying to bring out something. You're not trying to make a lot of different things. You're trying to bring out what's true about you.
Right.
And we have always focused a bit more on the latter of those.
Okay.
And so that's kind of a journey within looking at what we have. And I mean, it's from grains to the climate to how we work with our local environment. All of those things that we've had to really go deep into to really be able to make the best we can. It's
sort of philosophically, it sort of reminds me a little bit of, say, of Bruichladdich, if you remember Bruichladdich and the way they do their whiskeys. When I think of, they're the only ones on Isla that have made a 100%, other than the barrels, 100% Isla whiskey from grain to glass and the whole 9 yards. And so, and then also having a very distinctive character to them, so that they don't fall into necessarily always the stereotype of Pete, although they do Octomore and everything else. So it's sort of not in terms of what you're producing or flavors and like that, but philosophically. Are you familiar with Bruichladdich?
I love Bruichladdich. I'm not as familiar with all of their story of how they
Yeah.
discovered who they are. I'm kind of curious. Like you've been there. I'm
Yeah.
curious. Uh, how did they go deeper?
Um, well, I don't, we can do a whole video talking about Bruichladdich. But they had an adjacent field of barley that they use there.
Okay.
Uh, so I would just very similar to the sort of the path that you're taking. Even Samara is not only in terms of what's coming into the distillery, but what's going out of the distillery, so
Hmm.
that they have runoff from their still that they turn into a biofuel that they use for their automobiles.
Right.
I mean that's really homegrown there. So um, there's great single malts in Texas, and there's great bourbons in Texas. So you and your dad, were you big bourbon drinkers before, or I just kind of why say bourbon versus single malt versus some other route?
Well, okay. Bourbon. I mean, whatever. Maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, all bourbon came from Kentucky.
Or more or
And
less.
we're obviously Americans, and it's interesting. Like we started looking at like where does bourbon go? Texans drink a lot of bourbon. Like we like it.
Right.
Part of the reason there's such a big bourbon industry in Kentucky is because Texans like to drink bourbon. Uh,
Right.
so it's like, well, I guess this is kind of it's our native spirit. It seems
Okay.
like we like.
Right.
And we were kind of we felt like it was a more simple approach to kind of acknowledge, okay, this is what we make in the United States. This is kind of our standard.
It's American. It's
It's
American.
more
It's
exactly,
American. And we're gonna make some bourbon. It's American.
exactly, and but then also like taking on the challenge of then what's a authentic Austin bourbon? What is that?
Right. So one of the things I liked about in visiting your distillery, and I highly recommend people visit, is there's sometimes, and I've seen this a lot in the wine industry, without naming any particular wineries. There's some wineries that are more of an event center. People to get married there. People they got a lot of trinkets. It's more on the tourism kind of thing. And some of them, which I'll remain nameless, don't even make their own wine. And
Mm,
so it's kind of that thing going on. They're a cool place to hang out and else, and the wine tends to be second thought, and not all that great quality. So I often, when I go to a winery, if they got tons of trinkets, long limousines out front, and a lot of bridal showers hanging out there, and it's just a lot of tchotchkes, I kind of go, okay, that maybe this isn't the place I want. This probably isn't the place I want to go to, and they do weddings, and that kind of stuff. Um, but there are also some that, if they don't have restaurants, something like, they still are very visitor friendly.
mhm.
And if you can produce a high quality whiskey or wine in terms of a winery, and yet be very visitor friendly, then I think you really are more welcoming. It's not just a matter of what you push out and put out into the market, but welcoming in terms of the whiskey or wine explorer to come visit you. And one of the things I liked about it is the layout of the tasting room. And then, of course, there's the outdoor part, because you guys a lot of times aren't getting a lot of rain. So unless it's too hot out there, you can hang out on the patio.
Mhm.
And then when you go into the tasting room, to see the production area, you don't have to go through some doors and up and down a bunch of stairs and some hidden place somewhere. It's right there, viewable from the tasting room, so you can actually see the production equipment. I really, really like that. The barrel room's a little bit more in the back, but I really like that, because whether or not they do a tour, they can actually get a sense of, okay, this is what's going on behind the scenes. And I really, really like that. So in terms of laying out the facility, stuff like that's sort of the philosophy as well.
Yes. There's a couple things we wanted to do when we were designing the facility. One was we wanted people to discover one kind of this. Okay, so when you're starting a whiskey distillery, you start going and saying, okay, well, what grains do we have available? And I have a little bit of a farming background from my childhood and my parents, but you typically go to the grain elevator and see kind of what they have available. And one of the things that we discovered in this process is that if we wanted to get food quality grain in Texas at the time that we started and really kind of focus on Texas, it really wasn't possible. We had to like the grain elevator could say, well, if you want food quality grains, you're probably going to be going to a vendor from Europe, not Central Texas. There wasn't really a great local grain economy. There's a global grain economy, or you could contract directly with an individual farmer, but they may not have the grain cleaning, the grain storage, the ability to get it from the farm to the distillery. All those sorts of things were things that had to be rebuilt, that it just hadn't really had not existed in the past. And so for us, it was very community based. We wanted to we certainly could have contracted directly with farmers, but we felt like farmers needed to have different places to be able to sell their grains, and we wanted to give Austinites more choices in what we eat and drink. And so for us, it was all about how do we facilitate and be part of a local grain economy.
Okay. So just for clarification for the viewers, so there are some of us who are super, super geeky and then there's some people might be a little bit more new. So I always have to keep them in mind. So you say food quality, most people go, as opposed to what, packing material? What kind of quality is there?
What is our quality of our grains? There's a couple of things that we look for in our grains. So first, we want grains that are of local variety. So, we pretty much use, early on, we did several tests of different grains from our region. We settled, on things like white corn that are, it's very common to our region. If you come to Texas, you're going to eat a lot of Tex-Mex food, and that has a lot of white corn in our corn chips and our corn tortillas. It's been here for about 2,000 years. It's a big part of kind of who we are. And so we use grain varieties that are part of our region. The grain kernels can be of different size. We like ones that are of a higher starch content, and especially like the Texas High Plains tends to have grain that has some of the highest starch content in the United States.
Which gives you more sugar, which then gives you more alcohol.
Gives you more sugar, more alcohol, and a flavor profile that, they tend to get more of their rains in the High Plains kind of in the August timeframe. Okay. And so that's when the corn is kind of growing out into its own. And so we don't take all of the kernels, like we like to separate out by size. And then the grain cleaning. I mean, we've had several master distillers that are kind of like in the Hall of Fame that have come to visit us to just kind of check out the distillery or help us understand kind of what if we had something we wanted them to look at. And one of the things that everyone has commented on is how incredibly clean the grain is and what good quality it is.
Wow.
And so and that is something that's not in the commodity grain system. It just doesn't exist.
What is commodity? Are you talking about grain that would just go for cattle, or what other kind of quality would there be then?
Yeah, so like BSG or some of these like other like big vendors that buy like tons and tons of grain, they put it in a grain elevator. There's not really like a separation out of different qualities. Like what we have done is we have worked with the malt houses here in Texas to put in place that infrastructure to be able to separate out different quality of grain, be able to, of course, they add malting as well, but the storage and all the other components to be able to have super chef's quality to start with. Okay. And that wasn't available before, kind of we got into this. You just had to kind of buy what was available or kind of take it from the farm and, like what comes off the field, it may not be as clean as what
right.
We want to have really good quality, with what goes in.
So was there a supply before you got started, or now that you created a demand, the supply started coming around? Hey, there's someone who wants this kind of corn. We're going to start growing it.
We are really fortunate, and these things take decades, to be honest, but we get approached by farmers now all the time, and we connect them with the malt houses, and a lot of the other distilleries have also decided that they want to focus on a component of what they're doing that's very local and are interested in local grain varieties or interesting ones, heritage ones, that sort of thing. And so for farmers, it's very risky. You have to have like a pretty strong intention and understand kind of what you're getting into. It's hard to insure the crops early on. You have to have basically 3 years before you can get insurance on an unusual grain variety. And so it's a bit of it's a commitment to get into this. But we have a lot of farmers now that are showing an interest because they can actually make more money on the grain, and we pay a bit more than we would if we bought them from a commodity vendor. But we also know that we aren't giving a lot of money to the middleman. That's sometimes not even in our country.
Right.
We are supporting. I know the names of the kids of the farmers who grow.
Wow.
It's like it's not this is not like some people that I'm talking of abstractly. Like I know them on a first name basis. I've been to their house.
Right. That's awesome. Wow.
So and they have become very important and integral in what we do. They're pretty wonderful folks too. So
that's awesome.
And so I think that's the other thing too, Eric, that I think that people miss sometimes in the like this stuff about like the terroir and the sense of the taste of your place is the culture. And one of the things that was really, if I can, stop me if I'm going too far afield, but one of the things that was kind of like a surprise for us that we were really excited about with our bourbon is that we worked with the white corn, which is naturally it's very sweet. It's a little less corny, if you will, than the corn that you have in Kentucky, yellow corn that you typically see in the Ohio Valley. And then we worked with rye varieties that are growing here in Texas. So we work with 3 different ones: Elbon, Bracetto, and now Renza Bruzzi.
Okay.
And
by the way, if anybody watching, there's going to be an exam later, so everybody's taking notes. We're going to test you on this.
Exactly. So the grain variety, some people criticize the rye that's grown in Texas, and some people like it a lot. Because we're interested in having a flavor from our place, we're really interested in what we can grow here. And Bracetto and Elbon is traditionally more of a grain for cattle, but it's got a kind of a sweet and spicy flavor profile. It's not as spicy maybe as some other ryes, but that sweet and spicy flavor balance was a surprise. We didn't know that that's what it was going to taste like.
And what was the name of that rye again?
There's 3, but what you're tasting has Elbon rye in it.
Elbon rye? Okay.
Elbon. The Bracetto is more, you kind of remember it because it sounds kind of like bread. It's more commonly used in rye breads.
Okay.
Renza Bruzzi is a little different flavor profile. They're fairly similar, but they're a little different. And for us, like one of the discoveries in this, and it really came from Nancy Fraley. Master knows. We can talk about her in a minute too. But,
awesome lady. She lives here in California.
She's awesome.
In Berkeley. Yeah, she's a really neat lady. I know she watches my channel. Hi, Nancy. And she comments every once in a while. Yeah, she's one I really want to talk to. I'm getting a plug here, Nancy. If you're watching, I want to talk. We want to talk.
Let her know.
There's just sort of the genius behind the scene. But anyway,
so the thing I was going to say is that sweet and spice, it's a cultural part of who we are in Texas. We have a Tex-Mex culture that is sweet and spicy. We have barbecue culture that's sweet and spicy.
Definitely.
And our sugar cookies that our kids eat tend to have a little cinnamon in them.
Okay.
That's a big part of kind of who we are. And you can even think, if you just, not to oversimplify, but we're kind of sweet people, and we've got some spice to us as well. All right.
I don't know if I've met any sweet Texans. I don't know. I challenge that one. I don't know.
But one of the things that we didn't set out to make a whiskey that has a nice sweetness and a note of spice, but it came out. And that came out by focusing on what we have.
Right.
Little element of our culture there.
Right. So rather than trying to, here's a profile we want to have, let's shoot for this. Instead, this is what we have, and this is what naturally came out of it. It just so happens that naturally it came about with a sweet and spicy counterbalance in there. And you get the sweetness up front, the spice is sort of in the mid to towards the back on that. So I can definitely see that. And if you think of, as a sommelier, if you have real spicy food, whether it's Indian or Asian, you tend to go with an off-dry Riesling, which works really well because that sweetness. So the spice in the food, That's a little bit of sweetness in the wines. You got to kind of get that counterbalance there. So it definitely works. It definitely fits in there.
And at some point too, I want to ask you more about pairing whiskey with food. Let's take that one offline, but I'm quite curious.
Okay, absolutely, absolutely.
Um, yeah, I think that those things are true. And then I think that I mean, the other dimension to that for us, like, I mean, we're not only a Texas distillery, we're in Austin, Texas. And Austin it's different than every other part of Texas.
It's a lot more for those who haven't been there, because I've been there a few times now. It's not as flat. It's a little more undulating hills, a little bit, a lot more green in terms of the trees. If you were to go on Google Earth and overlook it, see a lot more green. But the soil seems like a lot more limestone, and really no one's digging any basements in there. Really, really hard ground there. And then music and bars and food and that kind of a thing. It's a different scene and feel to it than a lot of the rest of Texas. I really, really like that. You still got that crazy ass weather, but
yeah,
and people. But I really like. If I was going to Texas, that's probably where I'd end up, is in Austin.
It is. It's a wonderful place. It's very vibrant. It's young. Austin, and it's known for being the live music capital of the world. It's also very somewhat eccentric place.
Right.
And one of the things, like, when I'm outside of Austin, sometimes people will say, if someone's walking or going somewhere and they look very different and they're just kind of proud of who they are, they're their own person.
Right.
I've heard people say, yeah, they would fit in Austin.
Okay. But Austin, look, we have enough Californians who've come here. We don't need.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome to Austin. I'll go back home.
Yeah, no, we're the fastest growing city in North America.
Right. So you produce any other spirits other than bourbon?
Yes, we do. We produce a gin.
Right.
And it's quite lovely. It's made with it's a rye gin, and it's made with our same rye. We use the same philosophy. Everything is all of our grains are grown here in Texas, and we're kind of a little bit unusual in that, like a lot of gin makers, like their focus is on the botanical mix,
right?
And they may just buy some spirit to start off with as a base. Right. And then kind of build on that. But we make our own base from grains grown here. And so we first make what is essentially an unaged rye whiskey. And then we chose botanicals that pair with the rye.
So let me pause there for a second. So generally speaking, a gin is a vodka with infused botanicals with at least juniper. So typically, it's a highly rectified spirit. I mean, it's like 94 to 95 ABV, and usually goes through a column still. So are you doing something different to make your gin other than that?
Yes. So we distill it to be able to hold on to some of the grain flavor.
Okay.
And also some of the mouthfeel and qualities that the rye has. It's got a creamy mouthfeel, and that's a nice quality in a gin.
Do you know what's the rectification or distillation? What's the do you know?
We have two distillations on the gin, so it goes through two different stills. So the first is on Nancy, she's our 50-foot still, tall column still, and she's kind of a very special craft column still, but she was designed by Mike Delavante. He's kind of an unusual master distiller that convinced us that we could make a better quality whiskey for what we're wanting to do and bring out the flavor of our grain through a column rather than a pot still, which we were hell bent to get when we first started. But he convinced us otherwise. And so off of that still, I think that we will. It's a whiskey, so it has to be under 180. And I can check you can correct me a little bit later on. I think that it's going to be closer to 160 when it comes to that still. And so, because we really want to bring out a lot of the flavor from the rye as the base. Then in the second distillation, we macerate the botanicals. We choose some warmer spices that pair well with rye. We chose some citruses that pair well with rye, and aspects that kind of accentuate that as a central component
Okay.
of gin. And then we have a second distillation on the Queen, as is our small pot still, and so there we'll move through a range, but we keep the proof relatively high. Even it's bottled at 90 proof.
Okay.
To be able to keep more of the flavor in the gin and in suspension. So some of the oils and things that would come out of suspension at a lower proof, we can keep in there, and it kind of makes for a more flavorful product.
So just for everyone watching, if you're going down there and you're going to visit the distillery, there's more to taste than just a drink or drink some gin. They also have cocktails there, so
Yes.
I highly recommend checking those out as well. Now, because I'm primarily a whiskey guy and a wine guy, I don't drink cocktails that often, but you can have a whiskey cocktail there as well. So it's just another way to sort of try their spirits before you take a bottle home as well. So really, really nice on that. Now, of course, one of the challenges we have, and hopefully we're going to see some changes, is Sundays. What you can drink versus what you can buy. I see the rolling of the eyes. Whatever else. So one of the is if you want to go there and you want to buy there to take home, you can taste on a Sunday, whatever else, you're gonna need to buy on another day. So just keep that in mind if you're coming from out of town. They got these funky laws, which hopefully the Texas Whiskey Association, hopefully we'll get some changes over the next few years to get that silliness. So you can still taste there. You just can't buy anything on that particular day.
You can't buy a bottle on that day, but you can buy a cocktail, a drink. Yeah. You can taste everything. So you can have a great experience, but you just can't take a bottle home.
Right.
That's in Texas everywhere. You can't buy a bottle of liquor anywhere in Texas on Sunday, period.
Right. And then there's the shipping issues and there's all that chance. But we're hoping. Here's the funny thing. I've become a Texas whiskey evangelist, and I'm in California.
Thank you.
And of all the whiskey tubers, I'm probably doing more to promote Texas whiskey. And sadly, I'm not as excited about California whiskeys. California wines, yes. Been in every region in California. I've been to 136 wineries in Napa Valley alone. Love California wine, but I'm not a big fan of a lot of distilleries here. They're kind of okay, but Texas is what's really got me excited there. But so I'm hoping laws will change so to make it easier that, these are super small distilleries, super small production. These are mom and pop, a lot of family owned distilleries. So even if they're not going to be in every whiskey shop or wine shop all over the country or the world, at least if we can get the laws to change, you'll be able to order something and have it shipped to your house. That's what we're really, really looking for. Hopefully we'll see that coming in the future. Another roll of the eyes. Oh, geez.
We're going to do our best. You can't ever tell if these things will change, but we do our best.
If I was running for president, this would be the top of my list of items I'd be running on. The other thing I thought about starting a whiskey religion. I started a whiskey church down there, 513C, and make it sacramental. So in order to then have other congregations around the country to protect our religious rights, we have to be able to ship sacramental whiskey around the country so that people can get the whiskey to the local whiskey church.
It very well may take an argument like that for this to actually change. But that's one of the things that's just kind of weird about Texas. And we got a lot of weird things and I appreciate you saying too, that like you enjoy Texas whiskey. And I think that like our weather in our state has been like a big part of that. Like all this, kind of our cycles of heat and cool or something that kind of impacts like what you see coming out of our state. And it ended up being like a big part for us too, right, with our Elevage philosophy that Nancy has taught us. And that's been something that's I think that's probably one of the things that makes us a little bit different from some distilleries, is the maturation aspect, that we really try to bring in that element of our climate and the taste that comes from our place. When you were on the tour, did they talk very much about Elevage and kind of that side of things?
No, and I know what the word refers to in making it say like champagne and wine. I don't know if it's so. Sometimes the same terminology is used in one, like um, there's some terminology that's used in wine that's used a little bit differently in whiskey. So, like cuvee. So, how would Elevage be used in the context of whiskey?
Sure. Can I geek out for a minute?
The geek out is what this channel is all about. It's like
Okay.
if people here just to be told what to drink, they'll come to the wrong place. This is about geekdom to the max.
Okay, I'm gonna geek out. So,
Oh, I get a ringing. All right, go
oh,
ahead.
I my computer telling me something. So,
Oh, I thought it was
um,
angels or something. We're talking about religion.
that's the ring that says we're gonna geek out now.
Okay, there you go.
Um, no, for Elevage, so Elevage to raise, like raising your kids, only you're raising your barrels from their birth to maturity, and so you raise each to its best maturity that you can. And one of the things that Nancy has taught us is one of the hallmark techniques of Elevage is a very slow reduction of
Okay.
the spirit, which we do while it's in the barrel.
So you
And
start off at a just sort of pause. So you start off at a so typical cask strength in Scotland is 63.5. Some other Texas distilleries, in order to not get over extraction tannins, they'll actually start at a lower ABV.
right,
So are you saying you're starting at a higher ABV and then reducing it in time?
that's right.
Okay.
So we currently start at between one. Now we're kind of putting it even a bit lower, but we started off by putting it in at 120
60 ABV.
ABV,
Yeah.
and then let it begin. There's obviously different processes that are going on in the barrel. There's an extractive process from the oak. There is a process through where you got esterification process, where some of the things that kind of taste like more like caramel corn start to taste more like caramel over
Okay.
time, and the oxidation processes that can mellow the spirit over time. And so what we do is we actually take the barrel off the rack each month and taste it, see how it's maturing, make note of that, add a little bit of water to it,
Okay.
and then put it back in the rack. And
Okay.
what that does is, like, we have kind of the benefit of both, if you will. Early on, you're going to get more alcohol solubles that are extracted out of the oak because you have more alcohol concentrated in the distillate.
Okay.
Later on, as you slowly bring that down, you're going to get more water soluble. Some more of the oak sugars or the wood sugars are going to come out. And so you're going to get a little bit more of those confectionery notes that are more common to a very good quality product. And by doing it very slowly and meticulously over the course of a year, each time that you do that, you're adding another layer of flavor and character to the spirit without shocking it. So
Right.
it results in a spirit that is, it has the aspects of being soft. It's got a bit of roundness in the spirit.
Better integration, I would imagine, as well.
I'm sorry?
A better integration rather than just having something that's
Yeah.
cask strength. Now we're going to make it take the bottle strength. We're going to add water to get it down to bottle strength. You have a slow, incremental, gradual integration of water. So it's a lot better integration rather than just
Yes.
like that.
And you avoid things like saponification, which can bruise the spirit and give it like a note of soap or
It's
like.
going to be on the exam, by the way. Saponification. Write that down. It's going to be on the exam.
You can always remember it because it sounds like soap.
Yeah. So in other words, saponification is give that soapy notes.
Yes.
That soapy notes.
Or
So
like
I've encountered that with some rye, and I've encountered that not very often, but with a few Scotch whiskeys, I've run into that.
Yeah, it can happen if you proof down too quickly.
Okay.
And so we do it very, very slowly. We're ridiculously slow. But it tend like, and this is a very young spirit. What you're tasting there has only been in the barrel for about a year. And so it's quite young, but it has the beginnings of finesse.
Okay.
And that comes from, using these techniques of Elevage to be able to bring out the flavor from our place. You're kind of working with the grain, working with the weather, and working with kind of your technique and how you um, kind of shepherd the barrel and raise it, kind of work with the barrel to kind of reach the best maturity.
So this is at just a little bit over 50% ABV,
Mhm.
or a little bit over 100 proof. So did you go, this is the number we want, and we're going to take it to get it to this number? Or did you go, this is the flavor we like, the character we like, the profile we want, and it just so happens to be at this particular ABV?
No, we this was once again one of these things that we just discovered from our region. We slowly started bringing it down, and when we began to feel like this is reaching a point that we feel is right, we stopped.
Okay. Okay. So it's much more of a, rather than how much money can we make, by adding water and stretching our production. Therefore, if we lower down to 40% is the minimum. Okay, let's take it down to 40% or whatever else. Okay, we get the most amount out of there. Therefore, because there are some distilleries that work that way, but rather it's okay. The flavor profile. This is kind of what is balanced. It has the finish. It has the length. It has the development, everything else. And because it's not 50 ABV and it's not 50.5, it's do the math again. 50.2, 50.2, which so it's very particular at the rate he's got to. And that's because you believe this is where it is just about right. So it's got enough ABV that if you wanted to cool it down, you're in a hot, sweaty day down in Texas, they get a few of those. You could put an ice cube if you want,
Absolutely.
but you don't have to. It tastes and feels. It doesn't have like this huge grip or bite or like that. A little spicy tingle that's that provides by the spice. Ginger cookie.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
get the ginger cookie, you get the sweetness, but you get that little ginger spice there. You kind of got that going on there. So it's a really well balanced and well developed bourbon in there.
I'll tell you one thing too. Can I tell you a little story that I think might put a little
Sure.
context on this? I think is kind of special. Like one of the things that I think is very special about Austin is that, like I said, that like this person that kind of looks a little different, they kind of fit in here. One of the things that we have as part of our culture here in Austin is that what we value, what makes you different. We place a high value on that. People pay attention to it. They're like, that's cool. That keep Austin weird. That's kind of our motto.
Right.
And so
Weird and barely legal.
through that. Okay, so like when we met Nancy Fraley, I met Nancy about 7 years ago when Dad and I were just drinking and having fun, and we took her whiskey class. And at that time, she really was not well known, really at all. The way that the whiskey industry worked at the time was, and this is not to take anything away from anyone, because there's incredible distillers that have been doing this for an enormous amount of time. But oftentimes, Nancy's job, kind of her background and career, was to go to a large established Kentucky whiskey distillery and basically sit down with the stocks that they had and use her skills with her nose and blending to master blend something that would win incredible awards.
Right.
And she was very skilled at it. But she, like when you start to look at like their stories tend to focus on tradition. The heroes of the story, I'm going to say, kind of look like you and me, like mature white male, people that kind of
and damn sexy,
damn sexy. Exactly, that's right. But they tend to fit a certain profile.
right?
And Nancy, as a very confident and very independent woman, kind of didn't really fit that profile. But she really knew what she was doing. It was like, damn, she really knows her stuff.
Right.
We should have her on our team. She's great. And so when we asked Nancy, we said, would you be willing to join our team? But she said, "Oh yeah, for sure, and I'm happy to come in and be a ghost blender for you." And she told us I always win gold, and she does she's very good at what she does. I was like, Nancy, we don't want you to be our ghost blender. We want to recognize you, what
Right.
you're bringing to this team, and what makes you different. We want to place a high value on that. And
Right.
we want to put you on our website. We want to talk about what makes you special. And we've even given her the name Nancy the Nose Fraley.
Right.
She's got a degree from Harvard, but she's got a
Right.
great.
Yeah, she studied law, and then she went to, I think, was it might have been Yale Divinity. I think she went to
Two things. She's
Yale Divinity, and she's a musician. She plays the drums. She plays the bass, and which the more I'm slowly getting to learn about her, we have very similar parallel backgrounds, very eclectic, kind of all over the place in our journey to come to where we're at. But anyway, go ahead.
I think you would love talking with her. But the thing that was really special about that I liked is, like, over the last several years, or half decade or so, her career has really taken off, and now she's recognized as one of possibly the best master nose in the world.
Right.
She knows a lot about master blending of not just whiskeys, but she's worked in every continent. She's worked everywhere from Tasmania to Indian whiskeys that she's working with right now. She's one of these people they call a musketeer of Armagnac. Armagnac she got her training with like an 8th generation Armagnac.
Right.
And it's the oldest aged distilled spirit in the world, Armagnac is. And so she's just got this incredible background, and now has kind of moved into this, kind of sphere of just really being like a kind of a sought after person. And she doesn't really take on new clients anymore. I mean, she will for an interesting project, but she doesn't. She doesn't have to seek out to be a ghost blender. We don't have to keep her in a closet. She is an important part of our team, and that's a big part, I think, of what makes us special. And we do that, like, not just. It's not just our team that is special. Like, what we want in our whiskey, we've tried to look at what makes Austin special, and we want to be a genuine expression of recognizing what makes every person different, special, and call that out, and celebrate it, raise a glass to it, celebrate their worth. And that's just a big part of, I think, what is unique about Austin. There's a little bit of Austin in just about everybody. And so I think the thing that's been kind of a piece that's kind of emerged for this out of us is being able to call that out, and invite people to let that part of what makes you different shine.
So one of the things I like to, whether I'm talking to fellow whiskey tubers or people in the wine industry, so what's people's background? How did they, on their journey, get to where they're at? I always like to know where people are coming from. Then what have they got going on? What have they been going on in history? But also what turns of what's going on in the future. So what perhaps for 2020 and beyond, anything we should look out for, we want to be aware of, what's coming on with Still Austin?
We've got some really exciting things. So this year is a very important year. So after 7 years of very hard work, we are going to release our straight bourbon, which is our flagship product, and it is tasting spectacular. It is tasting amazing. It has everything that's in the bourbon whiskey. You are one of the few people who has batch 1 of our bourbon whiskey, and we've had a second batch, and we're now releasing our 3rd batch. But when that 3rd batch is gone, it'll never be there anymore, because it'll be replaced by our main product, which is our great bourbon. And That is going to come out in June. And if I was going to say one thing, I would say make plans for June. Come and visit us.
Okay.
It's just really a truly special product. It's everything that we've worked and worked toward, discovered, and pulled together for. And it's surprised us with what it has to offer. And that the other thing that we have is our Distillery Reserve series. We've only released one of our Distillery Reserve series. We had a sherry cask finish bourbon, which it was. We encourage creativity. We encourage people to get involved, and with our distillers, we encourage some creativity in our Distillery Reserve series. So they typically will pick maybe three. In our first one, they pick three of our best barrels, and then further age them in a
best sherry barrels or best bourbon barrels?
Bourbon barrels, and then transferred their contents into a PX sherry barrel, which a PX sherry barrel will hold about 3 53-gallon standard bourbon barrels.
Right.
So we had that release in November of 2019, and it sold out very quickly. It was super popular, and it was just a really spectacular expression. The spice of the rye really paired in a very special way with the sweetness and that comes in the PX sherry cask. And so it's just something the first time that anything like that has been done. There's not to say that there aren't other distillers that are doing things that are very special as well.
I know a couple of bottles that Nancy's done with other producers. With Pedro Jimenez, Oloroso Sherry, and I think the other one was, I can't remember, it was a port. I could be wrong about that one, but anyway, a triple finishing. But anyway, so I might be down there in July. I have to wait and see. I'm looking to see how vacation rolls and so forth, but I might be down there for about a week in July. If so, hopefully I get you guys to hold a bottle for me, and I'll drop in and pick one up.
We might be able to help you out there. We're going to have 5 Distillery Reserve series this year, and so just kind of watch our website, and I think here in the next few weeks we'll have the ability to begin to pre-reserve. And so just keep an eye out, stillaustin.com.
Okay.
And because we'll have our main big release for this year, and then the Distillery Reserve series. It's something that's really special.
All right, cool. All right, so we're right about at the hour point. I want to thank you very, very, very much. I can talk for hours and hours and hours about whiskey and ask a lot more questions, but I really want to thank you for coming on. This has been absolutely spectacular. I really get something different out of every person I bring on. I learn so much. You never know everything, and just see some things that are sort of common understanding whiskey as a whole, but also what's distinctive about particular distilleries. People and coming from really great whiskeys and yet achieving and bourbons, whiskeys, achieving it, and yet from different angles and methods. It's kind of like guitarists or musicians. Great guitarists, and yet doing something completely different in how their approach to making music. But I really, really appreciate coming on, and highly recommend anyone visiting Austin, Texas, which right now seems to be one of the biggest hubs visiting Texas distilleries. Highly, highly, highly recommend checking out Austin, Still Austin, Texas Distillery. All right. So if you guys haven't already, if you haven't already subscribed, if you haven't already given this video a thumbs up, please do. And Chris, thank you much for coming on. This has been absolutely spectacular. It's been a great time.
Erik, it's been a lot of fun talking with you. Thank you for having me on, and look forward to seeing you when you come back.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out these other whiskey videos.